They threw her off the ranch for saving a wounded stranger. Then he returned with the deed. The lantern was swinging hard in the barn when Mara Whitcomb put herself between a wounded man and the barrel of her boss's rifle. Outside, the New Mexico wind dragged dust across the yard like it wanted to bury the whole Broken Spur Ranch before morning. The cattle bawled weakly beyond the corrals. The well had dropped so low that every bucket came up with mud on the rope. Men had gone quiet from hunger and bad wages, and the horses stood with their heads low, ribs showing under their hides. But the man on the barn floor was worse off than any of them. He had stumbled in through the open door just after midnight, one hand pressed to his side, his coat torn, his face gray under trail dust. He had made it 3 steps past the tack wall before his knees gave out. Mara had been oiling harness leather by lantern light when he fell. Now she knelt beside him with a tin cup of water in one hand and a strip of clean flour sack in the other. "Move away from him," Gideon Voss said. His rifle did not shake, neither did his voice. Gideon owned the Broken Spur, though lately it seemed the ranch owned him. Debt had thinned his face and sharpened his temper. Drought had turned his patience mean. Every missing steer, every cracked water trough, every unpaid note from the bank made him look at the world as if someone had cheated him personally. Mara looked up at him. She was 21, lean from work, with brown hair braided tight and sleeves rolled above scarred wrists. She had been on that ranch since her mother died and her father's old army friend helped her find work. For 3 years she had cooked, mended fences, dragged calves out of mud, read bills for men who could not read them, and kept ledgers cleaner than the owner ever cared to notice. "He needs water, Mr. Voss," she said, "and that cut over his eye needs washing before it turns foul." Rusk Bannon, the foreman, laughed from behind Gideon's shoulder. He was a thick-necked man with a habit of standing too close and speaking too low. "Listen to her. Broken Spur's little doctor. Maybe she plans to feed him sugar next." Mara ignored him and dipped the cloth into the cup. The stranger opened his eyes for half a breath. They were dark, steady, and clearer than they ought to have been for a man that hurt. He looked from Mara to the rifle, then closed them again. Gideon stepped closer. That man did not fall off a church wagon. Somebody marked him up and left him for the buzzards. If those somebodies come looking, I will not have trouble brought under my roof. "He is already under your roof," Mara said. "He is under my barn roof because you dragged him out of the yard. He would have frozen in the trough shadow. He is not my concern." The words hit the floor flat and cold. Mara knew exactly what she was standing against. Her bunk was above the kitchen. Her meals came from the same flour barrel she measured every week. Her wages, thin as they were folded in a tobacco tin beneath her mattress. Gideon could send her out before sunrise with nothing but her carpet bag and the clothes she could carry. Rusk seemed to see that thought cross her face. He grinned. "There are plenty of girls in Mesilla who would scrub pots for supper. Don't think yourself rare." Mara's fingers tightened around the wet cloth. Her grandfather's brass compass hung on a cord beneath her dress, warm against her skin. It had belonged to Eli Whitcomb, a mule skinner and scout who had crossed half the territory with army wagons before settling near the Pecos. He had raised Mara after fever took her parents. On winter evenings, he would set that compass in her palm and tell her that north was not always the direction a person wanted, but it was the direction that kept a person honest. "Land can be lost," he used to say. "Money can vanish by morning, but once you sell your mercy, child, you may never buy it back." Mara looked down at the stranger. His breathing was shallow but even. His right hand was rough, yet the nails were neatly kept beneath the dirt. His coat was poor, but the stitching on the inside cuff was fine. He was no common trail beggar, though he had tried hard to look like one. That made her cautious, but it did not make him less human. "I will use my own share of water," she said. "My own cloth. He can stay in the barn till daylight. Then I will see if he can ride in the supply wagon toward town." Gideon's eyes narrowed. "You bargaining with me now?" "No, sir. I am telling you what decency costs. It is not much." Rusk's smile disappeared. "Careful." Gideon lowered the rifle only a little. "You touch him again, Mara, and you are finished here." The wind struck the barn wall. A horse shifted in its stall, hooves scraping the straw. Somewhere in the dark, a loose hinge tapped and tapped. Mara looked at the cup. She looked at the man on the floor. She thought of the empty country road, the miles to town, the little money hidden upstairs. Then she slid her arm under the stranger's shoulders and lifted the cup to his mouth. The stranger drank one slow swallow. Gideon's jaw worked. "That is your answer, then," he said. Mara did not look away. "Yes, sir." "Pack before dawn." His voice rose so the hands near the barn door could hear it. "You are no longer employed on the Broken Spur. You are off my land by sunrise." Rusk gave a low whistle. All for a man who won't remember her name by morning. Mara laid the wet cloth over the stranger's brow. Her hands were steady until Gideon and Rusk turned away. The barn door slammed behind them, and only then did her breath catch. She had lost her bed, her wages, her place at the table. The nearest town was a long walk through dry country, and the night suddenly felt too large around her. The stranger's eyes opened again. "You knew what he would do," he said, his voice rough but educated. "I did. And you helped me anyway." Myra wrung out the cloth. "Hold still, talking waste strength." A faint trace of a smile touched his mouth, then vanished under pain. "What is your name?" "Mara Whitcomb." At that, something changed in his face. Not surprise exactly. Recognition, maybe, or the first piece of a puzzle sliding into place. "Mara Whitcomb," he repeated softly. She glanced at him. "Do I know you?" "Not yet," he said. The lantern flame bent in the draft, throwing gold across the brass compass at her throat as it slipped free of her collar. The stranger stared at it for one long second. Then he closed his hand weakly around the edge of his torn coat and whispered, "By morning, Miss Whitcomb, this ranch will not look the same." Dawn came pale and colorless over the Broken Spur, and Mara Whitcomb woke with straw in her hair and fear sitting heavy in her chest. The wounded stranger was gone. For a moment she thought he might have shifted deeper into the hay, but the place beside the center post was empty. The cloth she had used on his brow lay folded on a crate. The tin cup sat beside it, clean and turned upside down, as if someone had taken care to leave no mess behind. Mara stood slowly. Her back ached from sleeping against the wall. Her eyes burned from keeping watch most of the night. Near the barn doors, the dirt showed the faint marks of boots dragging a little at first, then growing steadier. Whoever he was, the stranger had walked out before sunrise. She touched the brass compass at her throat. "Well," she whispered, trying to keep her voice from breaking, "I hope North found you." There was no time to wonder more. Gideon Voss would not change his mind. A man like him sometimes regretted a decision, but pride would make him defend it till it ruined him. Mara climbed the back stairs to the small room over the kitchen. It took her less than 10 minutes to pack her life. 2 work dresses, both patched at the elbows, a spare pair of stockings, her mother's hair comb, missing 3 teeth, a small Bible with her grandfather's name written in brown ink. A rolled photograph of Eli Whitcomb standing beside an army mule team, his hand resting on the lead mule's neck. Last, she reached under her mattress for the tobacco tin that held her wages. It was gone. Mara stared at the bare boards. Her mouth went dry. She lifted the mattress, checked behind the loose plank, searched the corners though she already knew. The tin had been there the night before. $32 and a few coins. 3 years of saving in small, careful pieces. She looked toward the window and saw Rusk Bannon crossing the yard below with his thumbs hooked in his belt. So that was how the morning would be. Mara put the photograph and Bible into her worn canvas bag. She tied the compass cord tighter around her neck and went downstairs. Gideon stood on the porch with coffee steaming in his hand. Rusk leaned against a post, smiling like he had already heard a good joke. 2 ranch hands watched from the bunkhouse steps. Neither met Mara's eyes. The charity case ran off, Rusk called. Didn't even stay to thank you proper. Mara kept walking. Gideon's gaze dropped to her bag. You were told to take what belongs to you. I did. Rusk stepped down into her path. That's so, boss is missing office money. Mara stopped. I have never touched his office money. Folks do desperate things when they get tossed out. My wages are missing from my room, Mara said. She looked straight at Rusk. Maybe desperate men do desperate things before breakfast. A few of the hands shifted. Gideon's face hardened, not with concern, but because she had said it in front of witnesses. You watch your tongue, he said. I have watched it long enough. Rusk moved closer. Open the bag. No. Open it, or I open it for you. Mara felt fear rise in her, sharp and cold, but it did not rule her. She had soothed panicked horses with less calm than she needed now. She had pulled calves from swollen creeks and faced bulls in narrow pens. Rusk wanted her small. He wanted trembling hands and lowered eyes. She gave him neither. I am leaving this ranch with my clothes, my Bible, my photograph, and my grandfather's compass, she said. If you take any of it, you will have to do it in front of every man here. For one breath, the yard went quiet. Then Gideon snapped, let her pass, I want her gone. Rusk's jaw flexed. He stepped aside, but as Mara passed, he murmured, road to town is long. Things get lost out there. Mara did not answer. She opened the ranch gate herself and stepped onto the trail. If you believe mercy still matters when nobody knows who is watching, stay with this story. Because the road out of the Broken Spur was where Mara learned that kindness can disappear from sight and still be moving toward justice. By mid-morning, the ranch was a brown smudge behind her. The land stretched wide and empty, broken by mesquite, stone, and dry washes. Her boots raised little puffs of dust with every step. The sun climbed higher, pressing heat into her shoulders. She had no canteen. Rusk had made certain of that, or Gideon had. It hardly mattered which hand had done the small cruelty. Mara counted fence posts in her head to keep steady. She thought of work. Work was easier than fear. The south pasture trough needed patching before the next drive. The heifers should have been moved away from the brittle grass near the arroyo. The feed ledger had been wrong for weeks, sacks marked as delivered that never reached the storeroom. She had noticed, because she noticed everything. A ranch survived in details. Men like Gideon shouted about ownership, but it was quiet work that kept animals alive. Around noon, hoofbeats sounded behind her. Mara turned. Rusk rode toward her with another hand named Lyle Pike, a narrow-faced man who followed orders quicker than he formed thoughts. They pulled their horses across the trail, blocking her way. Rusk smiled down from the saddle, forgot something. I forgot nothing. Boss says you took a brass token from his desk. Says it may be hidden under your dress or in that bag. Mara's hand went to the compass at her throat. Rusk saw it and smiled wider. There it is. This belonged to Eli Whitcomb. Looks like ranch property to me. Lyle shifted uneasily. Rusk, she ain't worth this trouble. Get down and search the bag, Rusk said. Mara backed away. You touch my grandfather's compass, and I will swear theft before the sheriff. Rusk dismounted. Sheriff listens to men with land. No, Mara said. He listens to men with proof. That is why you are afraid of ledgers. The words struck true. Rusk's face darkened. He grabbed for her bag. Mara twisted away, but he caught the strap and yanked hard enough to spill its contents into the dirt. Her Bible fell open. The photograph rolled toward the brush. Her dresses landed in the dust. Then a voice came from the rise behind them. Pick those up. Rusk froze. 5 riders stood against the white glare of noon. Their horses were strong, clean, and rested. The men wore dark coats despite the heat, and each carried himself with the stillness of someone paid not to waste motion. Beside them waited a black carriage with polished lamps and iron-rimmed wheels. At the center sat the wounded stranger. Only now he wore a dark wool coat, a clean shirt, and a gray hat with a silver band. His face was washed, though bruising still shadowed one cheek. His injured arm rested in a proper sling. He looked tired, but no longer helpless. He looked like authority had found a body and climbed into it. Rusk took one step back. You. The stranger guided his horse forward. His eyes moved from the scattered Bible to the photograph in the dust, then to Mara's face. Mr. Bannon, he said, his voice quiet. You will remove your hand from Miss Whitcomb's property. Rusk swallowed. Mister, this is Broken Spur business. No, the stranger said. It is mine now. One of the riders dismounted and lifted Mara's photograph gently from the ground. Another gathered her dresses and Bible. Neither man laughed. Neither man looked at her with pity. Mara stared up at the stranger, her heart beating so hard she could hear it. You left, she said. I went for witnesses, he answered. The carriage door opened, and a silver-haired lawyer stepped down holding a leather document case. Behind him rode 2 deputy marshals from Mesilla, badges plain on their vests. Rusk's face lost its color. Mara looked from the deputies to the lawyer, then back to the man she had bandaged in the barn. The stranger touched the brim of his hat with his good hand. My name is not the one I gave you last night, he said, and I owe you the truth. Mara stood in the road with dust on her skirt, and her grandfather's compass pressed beneath her fingers. The man on the horse looked like the same soul she had helped through the night, but the world around him had changed. Yesterday, he had been a torn coat and a fading breath under barn light. Now 2 deputy marshals waited behind him. A lawyer held papers in a black case, and the riders at his back watched Rusk Bannon as if one wrong move would be remembered in court. Rusk tried to gather himself. Whatever game you're playing, stranger, Gideon Voss owns the Broken Spur. For another few hours, perhaps in his own mind, the man said. The lawyer stepped forward. Mr. Bannon, I advise you to keep silent unless asked a direct question by the marshal. Rusk's mouth opened, then shut. Mara looked up at the stranger. You said your name was Jonas. It is one of my names, he said. Jonas Vale. But in Santa Fe, Denver, and most bank offices between here and the railhead, I am known as Everett Vale. Mara knew the name. Every rancher in the Southern Territory knew it. Everett Vale owned the Cimarron Stock Company, half the rail contracts that moved beef east, and notes on more dryland ranches than most men had fingers to count. He was not only rich, he was the kind of man other rich men answered carefully. She took one slow breath. Why come to Broken Spur dressed like a poor rider? Everett looked toward the ragged hills beyond the trail. Because my cattle were vanishing near Voss land, and every formal visit gave him time to sweep his yard clean. The deputy marshal nearest Rusk shifted in the saddle. Everett continued. For 6 months, steers marked with my company brand disappeared between the Arroyo crossings and the rail pens. Gideon Voss owed my bank division more than he could pay. Still, his feed accounts showed purchases he could not afford, and his cattle count changed in ways no drought could explain. Mara remembered the ledgers in Gideon's office. Sacks of feed marked delivered, but never seen. Calves recorded twice. Sale dates written in Rusk's heavy hand instead of Gideon's. She had thought it was laziness at first. Then she had begun to wonder. "You came looking for proof," she said. "I did. I rode in plain clothes, alone enough to be ignored, but not without men nearby. I found a brush corral tucked in a canyon 2 miles east of your south fence. Fresh brands had been burned over. 3 of my missing steers were there, along with cattle from 2 smaller outfits." His jaw tightened. "I was leaving to bring the marshals when 2 men found me." Rusk looked at the ground. Everett did not raise his voice. "They meant to frighten me away. They did not know who I was. I reached your barn because it was closer than my camp." "And Mr. Voss knew?" Mara asked. "I believe he knew enough to profit and enough to deny. The papers will show the rest." The lawyer opened his case and removed several folded documents. Mr. Voss defaulted on 2 secured notes. He also pledged cattle as collateral that appear, by preliminary count, not to have belonged to him. The foreclosure process began before last night. Today's filings complete what his own signatures started. Mara felt the ground under her life shift again. This was not a powerful man buying a ranch because he had been insulted. It was a house already cracked, finally giving way under the weight of what had been hidden inside it. Rusk muttered, "Hard years make hard choices." Everett turned to him. "Hard years do not forge another man's brand over stolen hide. They do not send a woman into the road and then chase her for the last thing her family left her." Rusk said nothing. A deputy dismounted. "Rusk Bannon, I am taking your statement in Mesilla. You can ride easy, or you can make it harder." Lyle Pike, still mounted behind Rusk, lifted both hands. "I'll talk. I never burned brands. I only rode night herd twice." Rusk gave the orders. Rusk shot him a look full of fury, but the deputy had already heard enough to step closer. Mara turned away as they dealt with him. She did not want his fear as payment. Fear had ruled the Broken Spur long enough. She knelt to gather the last of her things, but Everett had already dismounted. With his good hand, he picked up her Bible and brushed dust from the cover. The movement was careful, almost reverent. Then he saw the photograph. The paper had unrolled beside a clump of dry grass. Eli Whitcomb stood in it, wearing a faded scout jacket, one hand on a mule's bridle, the brass compass chain visible against his vest. Everett went very still. "Mara," he said softly, "where did you get that compass?" She touched it through her dress. "It was my grandfather's." "Eli Whitcomb." Her eyes lifted. "You knew his name." Everett removed his hat. The gesture made the road feel suddenly quieter. "My mother did," he said. "She spoke it like a prayer when I was a boy." Mara could not answer. Everett held the photograph between them. "In the winter of 1867, before I was born, my mother was traveling west with a supply column near Fort Union. A storm caught them in open country. The guide was killed by fever, the soldiers lost the trail, and the wagons began to break apart in the snow. My mother was young, pregnant, and very close to death. The wind moved over the road, lifting the edge of Mara's skirt. Eli Whitcomb was a scout with that column, Everett said. Orders came to abandon 2 wagons and save the teams. Your grandfather refused. He cut loose his own mule, loaded my mother and 3 sick men onto a sled frame, and walked beside them through the night with only that compass and a lantern to hold direction. Mara's hand closed around the brass case. She could almost feel her grandfather's rough palm over hers, teaching her to read the needle. He never told it that way, she whispered. Good men rarely tell the largest version of themselves. Everett's voice grew unsteady for the first time. My mother lived. I lived because she lived. She kept a letter for years, asking every trader and cattleman if they knew what became of Eli Whitcomb. By the time I found his trail, he had passed. Then I learned he had a granddaughter working on a ranch held under one of my notes. Mara looked toward the Broken Spur, hidden beyond the hills. You came because of him. I came because of him, Everett said. I stayed because of what I found. If you believe kindness can travel farther than the person who first gave it, stay with this story, because what happened next was not charity. It was an old debt finding the right hands. Everett placed the photograph back into Mara's bag with care. I did not know whether you would be like him, he said. A family name proves nothing by itself. Then last night, you gave water to a man who could offer you nothing. You stood against the man who controlled your supper and your roof. That answered what no document could. Mara swallowed hard. I only did what he taught me. That is why it matters. The lawyer stepped beside them. Mr. Vale, the Mesilla office received confirmation. The deed transfer from Gideon Voss to the Cimarron Holding Trust is recorded. The Broken Spur is under your control pending final inventory. Everett nodded, then looked at Mara. No, he said quietly, pending one more decision. Mara did not understand until he lifted the brass compass from where it rested against her collar and let it settle back gently over her heart. Your grandfather once led my family out of a storm, Everett said. Now I intend to see his granddaughter brought home the right way. In the distance, beyond the shimmer of noon heat, the Broken Spur gate waited like a question that had not yet learned its answer. The black carriage waited in the road with its polished door open, but Mara did not step inside. Everett Vale noticed. So did his lawyer, the deputies, and the riders who had come with him from Mesilla. The whole company seemed to pause around her, as if the world had offered comfort and could not understand why she hesitated. Mara looked at the carriage cushions. Clean velvet, brass handles, a folded blanket on the seat, a small basket beside it, likely packed with bread, fruit, and cold meat. After a morning of walking under the sun, every part of her body wanted to climb in and accept it. But she had spent too many years being owned by favors. What is it? Everett asked. Mara held her canvas bag tighter. I thank you for helping me on the road, truly, but I do not want to be carried into town like a rescued child. You are not a child. Then do not treat me as one. The lawyer raised his brows, but Everett only studied her with that steady, thoughtful gaze. Mara drew a breath. I need work, Mr. Vale. I need wages I earn. I need a place where no man can take my bed because I gave water to someone thirsty. If you mean to pay an old debt to my grandfather, I am grateful. But I cannot live on gratitude. It turns sour when a person has no use. Everett's face softened, not with pity, but with respect. My mother used to say almost the same thing, he said. She hated being helped unless there was a task in her hands. Then she was sensible. At that, a small smile crossed his mouth. Very. Mara glanced down the trail toward the ranch. The Broken Spur is in worse shape than Mr. Voss admits. The south trough leaks from the lower seam. The east fence has been patched with green wood that will split in a month. The feed count in the ledger is false by at least 12 sacks. 3 hands are owed back pay, and if they do not get some of it soon, they will leave before roundup. The lawyer's expression changed. He opened his case and pulled a pencil from inside. You know this from memory. I wrote half those numbers because Mr. Voss hated columns. Rusk changed some after I put them down. Mara looked back at Everett. The cattle need to be moved off the west flats until rain comes. There is still grass in the draw below Cottonmouth Ridge, but the gate sticks and the men avoid it because the hinges are bad. 2 hours of work would fix it. Everett turned to his lawyer. Mr. Arlen, write that down. I am already doing so, the lawyer said. Mara's cheeks warmed, but she kept speaking. The ranch can live if someone stops bleeding it. Sell the worst horses, keep the mares, pay the hands honestly, check the brands on every steer before market, and buy oats before flour. Men can complain through thin biscuits. Horses cannot work on speeches. One of Everett's writers coughed into his glove to hide a laugh. Everett did not laugh. You have been running that ranch from the corners while Voss stood on the porch. No, Mara said. I have been surviving it. There is a difference, he agreed, but not as large as you think. The sun lowered a little, turning the dust gold around them. Rusk had been taken ahead by the deputies. Lyle Pike rode with them willingly, eager now to tell every truth he had swallowed. The road felt wider without Rusk on it. Everett reached into the carriage and took out a leather folder. Miss Whitcomb, I cannot simply hand you unrestricted title this afternoon and call it wisdom. Even if the law allows it, a ranch under foreclosure, investigation, and debt settlement needs structure. It needs protection from creditors, rustling claims, and men who will test you because they think fairness is weakness. Mara listened carefully. So here is what I propose, he said. The Broken Spur will be placed in the Whitcomb Vale Land Trust for 5 years. Cimarron Stock Company will clear the lawful debts, pay back wages, and fund repairs. You will serve as resident manager with a proper salary, full authority over daily operations, hiring, supply ledgers, and herd care. Mr. Arlen will handle legal filings. I will hold financial oversight until the ranch is steady. And after 5 years, if you have kept the ranch honest and solvent, controlling ownership transfers to you. If you decide before then that you want another life, the trust will buy out your interest, and you will leave with enough money to begin freely elsewhere. Mara stared at him. Why would you trust me with that much? Because last night showed your courage, Everett said. This morning showed your pride. The last 10 minutes showed your competence. Your grandfather explains why I came looking. You explain why I am staying. The words landed in her chest, with a weight she had no defense against. No one had ever named her work that way. Gideon had called it duty. Rusk had called it women's fussing. The ranch hands had accepted it like weather, useful only because it was always there. Everett had listened to her speak of hinges, ledgers, water, grass, and wages, as if those things were the bones of a kingdom. Mara touched the compass at her throat. What if the men will not take orders from me? Then they may seek employment under someone who enjoys losing money, Everett said. This time Mara almost smiled. Tell me in the comments, would you have accepted safety first, or asked for work like Mara did when the whole world had just shifted beneath her boots? Everett offered his hand, not to lift her into the carriage, but to seal an agreement. Mara looked at it for a moment. His hand was bruised across the knuckles, the sling still holding his left arm close. He was powerful, yes, but not untouched. He had bled in the same barn where she had been cast out. He had heard what mercy cost. She shook his hand. "Then I will need the south trough repaired first," she said. "Before supper," Everett replied. "And the hands paid before anyone speaks of loyalty." "Agreed." "And Mr. Voss leaves with his personal belongings only. Ranch horses, ledgers, tack, and cattle stay." Mr. Arlen nodded. "That is already supported by the deed and lien documents." Mara lifted her bag and finally stepped into the carriage. Not because she had surrendered her independence, but because she had chosen the road back. Everett climbed in across from her. The riders formed around them. The lawyer took the forward seat with his papers balanced on his knee. As the carriage turned toward the Broken Spur, Mara looked through the window at the trail she had walked that morning with no water and no place to go. Her own footprints still marked the dust. Ahead, the ranch gate waited under the hard blue sky. The first time she passed through it that day, she had been banished with one bag. Now she was returning with the deed, the truth, and a compass that had finally pointed home. By late afternoon, the Broken Spur gate stood open. Mara saw it from inside the carriage before she saw the house. The same rough posts leaned under the same sun-baked sign. The same chain hung from the same iron hook. Only that morning, she had pushed it open with one hand and carried her whole life in the other. Now the carriage rolled through it with riders on both sides and legal papers on the seat beside her. No one spoke for a moment. The yard came into view slowly. Gideon Voss stood on the porch with a telegram crushed in his fist. Two trunks sat near the steps. His coat was buttoned wrong, and his face had the pale, stiff look of a man who had been struck by news he could neither fight nor outrun. Several hands stood near the bunkhouse, watching from a distance. They had the cautious faces of men who had lived too long under sudden anger. Gideon saw the carriage and straightened. He pulled his shoulders back, trying to recover the shape of authority. He likely expected a banker, a clerk, or some town agent sent to count chairs and cattle. The carriage stopped. Mr. Arlen stepped out first, carrying his document case. Then Everett Vale climbed down, his injured arm held in its clean sling, his dark coat brushed free of trail dust. Gideon's mouth opened. For one bare second, he was back in the barn, staring at the man he had refused water. "You," he said. Everett looked up at him calmly. "Good afternoon, Mr. Voss." Gideon gripped the porch rail. The telegram said Everett Vale had taken control. "That is correct. You were the rider in my barn." "I was." The ranch yard went still. A horse stamped once near the hitching post. Somewhere behind the kitchen, a loose shutter knocked in the wind. Gideon's eyes moved over the riders, the lawyer, the deputies arriving behind them, and at last the carriage door where Mara still sat unseen in shadow. "I did not know who you were," Gideon said. "No," Everett answered, "you did not. I had a ranch to protect. You had stolen cattle to hide, debts to delay, and a foreman willing to threaten a woman on the public road." Gideon's face tightened. "Rusk acts rough, but I never told him to harm her." One deputy stepped forward. "Rusk Bannon is giving a different account in Mesilla. So is Lyle Pike." The words landed hard. Gideon looked suddenly older. Mr. Arlen opened his leather case. "Gideon Voss, the secured notes on this property are in default. The deed of trust has been executed according to territorial law. Pending inventory, the ranch house, barns, water rights, tack, work horses, cattle under lien, and all operating ledgers are no longer yours to remove." "This is my land," Gideon said, but there was no force in it. "It was land you were trusted to steward," Everett said. "You used hunger and fear to hold it together, then theft to cover what fear could not repair." Gideon looked at the men near the bunkhouse, as if hoping one would step forward. None did. Mara opened the carriage door. The sound was small, but every head turned. She stepped down with her canvas bag in one hand and her grandfather's brass compass resting against her plain dress. Dust marked her hem. Her boots were the same worn boots that had walked the road. She had not become grand in a few hours. She had only become visible. Gideon stared at her. What is she doing here? Everett turned so his voice carried across the yard. Miss Mara Whitcomb is resident manager of the Broken Spur under the Whitcomb Vale Land Trust. She has authority over daily operations, wages, ledgers, hiring, herd care, and supplies. Any hand who wishes honest work for honest pay may stay and answer to her. The hands looked at Mara, then at one another. Old Ben Tully, who had ridden fence since before Mara arrived, removed his hat. "Miss Mara knows the water lines better than any man here." Another hand nodded, and she knows who is owed what. Gideon's face flushed. "You would take orders from a kitchen girl." Mara looked at him without anger. That was what unsettled him most. "I cooked because men needed feeding," she said. "I mended fence because cattle needed holding. I read ledgers because numbers matter whether a man respects them or not. You called it kitchen work when it suited you. I call it ranch work." No one laughed. No one moved away. Everett's gaze stayed on Gideon. "You have 1 hour to gather personal belongings. Mr. Arlen will review each trunk before it leaves. The deputies will remain until you are on the road." Gideon swallowed. "And where am I meant to go?" "That is for you to decide," Mara said. He looked at her then, really looked. Perhaps he expected triumph. Perhaps he expected her to shame him in front of the men. But Mara only stepped onto the porch she had scrubbed for years and stood where he had stood that morning. "You may take food for 2 days," she said, "and 1 personal horse if Mr. Arlen confirms it is not under lien. No man leaves this yard thirsty." Everett glanced at her, and something like pride touched his eyes. Gideon lowered his head. His defeat did not come from Mara's cruelty. It came from his own signatures, his hidden corrals, his unpaid debts, and the workers he had mistaken for tools. If Mara's courage stayed with you, remember this moment. Real justice did not need a raised voice. It only needed truth, witnesses, and one woman who refused to become hard just because the world had been hard to her. By dusk, Gideon's trunks were loaded. He rode out through the same gate Mara had walked through that morning. Rusk remained in Mesilla under lawful charge for attempted robbery and his part in the stolen cattle scheme. Lyle Pike's testimony led the deputies to the canyon pens, where brands and ledgers told the rest of the story. The broken spur did not heal in a day. But before supper, Mara sent 2 men to the South Trough with tools and pitch. She ordered the remaining hands paid half their back wages from Everett's advance, with the rest written plainly in the ledger. She moved the weakest cattle toward Cottonmouth Ridge and told the cook to stretch beans with dignity, not sawdust biscuits and anger. The men listened, not because she frightened them, because she knew what needed doing. A month later, rain came soft over the valley. It began at dawn, tapping on the porch roof of the ranch house. By noon, the dust had settled, and the dry flats smelled of wet earth. The cattle grazed in grass that had begun to show green at the roots. The gate had been rehung straight. The barn lantern, cleaned and polished, hung by the door for any traveler who might need to find shelter after dark. Everett stood beside his carriage, ready to return north. His arm had healed enough to leave the sling behind. In his hand, he held a folded letter. "My mother wrote this years ago," he said. "She meant it for Eli Whitcomb. It belongs with you now." Mara accepted it carefully. Inside was a simple thank you written to a man who had followed a compass through snow and saved people who could never repay him. She opened the brass compass. The needle trembled, then settled. Everett touched his hat. "Your grandfather's debt is not erased, Mara. It is honored." She looked toward the open ranch door, where warm light fell across clean floorboards. "No," she said softly, "it is still traveling." Everett smiled, then climbed into the carriage. As he rode away, Mara stood on the porch of the ranch that had once been only a place to sleep. Now the hands came through the yard without fear. The books were open. The water was shared. The door stayed wide. Rain fell over the broken spur, gentle and steady, while Mara Whitcomb held her grandfather's compass in her palm and watched the land become home.